Hey, deserving listeners, this is part 4 in which I react to Ethan Klein's apology for his recent behavior on the internet. So let's get to it.
Was really dumb and rude and careless in that moment. But yeah, it's something that happens a lot, as some of you guys probably know who follow me or are aware of me. And yeah, I don't know why,
And I want to point out that we're almost halfway through his apology video. And that's how it's labeled. It's called Apology to Cutie Cinderella. It's the full title is What is Wrong with Me? Apology to Cutie Cinderella on the Ethan Klein YouTube channel. This is a ancillary YouTube channel to his H3 podcast, I believe. But anyway, so he has yet to say anything, in my view, that is overtly self-preservation wise, right? With Atrioc, it seemed to me like his entire apology video was trying to exhibit that he doesn't want to lose his audience. That's the way it seemed. Or that he was sorry that he was caught. That's the way it seemed. He seemed legit sorry. He didn't come across like he was psychopathic or something, like he didn't care. But it seemed to be very much from the experience that he was going through, whereas Ethan has yet to do that. He's yet to say something like, I've been suffering, this is all about me, and I hope people understand that I'm not normally like that. I mean, Ethan's doing the opposite of what Atrioc is doing. Ethan's like, yeah, I'm like this. This is a pattern. This is something that I do.
I've tried to be mindful. I think I've made progress in some areas and in some areas not. I've tried to be mindful of of preventing these kinds of things from not happening.
So that's another really great aspect of an apology, if you can legitimately claim that you recognize that this is an ongoing pattern of yours, an impulse, a motivation that you have that's regrettable, a blind spot or something. And you've also tried to stop yourself from doing it. You tried to work on it. You've been successful maybe in some areas, but not entirely. Often when we're apologizing to people close to us. And in all likelihood, whatever transgression you have committed on someone close to you, you have committed several times previous to them, or at least to other people in general, to everyone you interact with. So it's important to explore that, recognize it, state it. This is a pattern of mine. And also, you should have been working on it, right? From the very first moment you recognized that this was a pattern, which hopefully was a long time ago, you set out to try to change it. And that is important. That's justice. Because it's normal to transgress. It's normal to have blind spots. It's normal to have personality issues. But if you don't address them, if you don't take the time to identify that personality issue in yourself, and you also don't spend the time to try to change it or address it or account for it, then that's on you, right? That's like the saying, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Meaning, if I commit a transgression one time, then it's like, wow, that was weird. But if I do it again, then I have to start raising a question as to, is this a pattern, which it probably is, and I have to account for it, because if I don't, I'm going to do it again in all likelihood, because my personality transgresses time and space. I almost never see that in these kinds of apology videos. Maybe never. I can't remember any time I've ever heard it. When we look at Donald Trump's apology, Bill Clinton's apology, Chris Brown's apology, all these people. I'm often figuring that the transgression that they committed was part of a pattern, and they should know that, and they should be addressing it. He is doing that. Ethan is doing it. He's like, this is a pattern, and I've been addressing it, which is great. Now, it doesn't eliminate the transgression, but if I were someone that he transgressed upon, if I were Cutie Cinderella, this would be so much more encouraging to hear. It's like, okay, well, you're trying your best. Now, if Ethan says, I've just been trying to not do it, I've just been trying to restrain myself, that's one thing. But if Ethan said, I've been going to therapy, I've been exploring it, I've been asking people around me, what's going on? How come I do this? I've been trying to look into my childhood. I've been trying to look into methods of managing my impulse issues. If I heard all that, if I were Cutie Cinderella, I'd be like, okay, well, it doesn't change the transgression, but it does show that you see what's happening. You recognize this wasn't just a one-off thing. This is something that you do in general. You've been trying to fix it. No one succeeds fully in those areas. Any pattern of transgression that we have as human beings is very difficult to change if ever we can change it, because it's often a part of our personality. It's often part of our relational traumas. Not that we can't change, but to 100% eliminate a pattern in our life is, take it from me as a therapist, is very hard. When I first became a therapist, I thought that was possible. But, working with people, it's often a matter of healing for the most part from the relational traumas that lead to that behavior and accounting for most of the transgressions and the motivations and the behaviors, but never entirely. And then you manage it, right? And then you quickly recognize it and apologize to the individual.
Obviously, the fact that I'm doing a live show makes everything like, if it was, listen, if it was recorded, I would obviously erase it, right? That'd be obvious. And if I could take it back, I would. But I can't do that, obviously, right? So I don't know, man. I don't know what it is. I don't know why I do these things. And it's quite unfortunate. And I understand a lot of people were offended or thought it was tasteless, and I totally get that, And most of all, though, I apologize. After it happened, I immediately went to Twitter and apologized to Cutie. She doesn't have to accept my apology. I don't know if she accepts my apology. But I did apologize to her.
Hopefully, Cutie Cinderella received that, and so he's saying that I immediately apologize. I don't know if she accepts my apology or not. That's up to her. It's great language along those lines. We don't often hear that from public apologies. A lot of the public apologies is they're just saying, hey, I'm sorry, let's move on. But really, you need to identify the transgression, which means you need to identify the person you transgressed upon. It's not just you apologizing to the world. You transgressed upon a single individual, Cutie Cinderella, and you need to identify the harm, which he has done for the most part as a topic sentence. If I were Cutie Cinderella, I would want a little bit more elaboration about the harm that he caused me. But, it's up to Cutie Cinderella to dictate for herself. And maybe he's capable of that, but he just hasn't gone into it.
And I also apologize to Ludwig, even though it didn't, you know what I mean? I felt like apologizing to both of them because I respect them both, you know what I mean? And I feel bad that I look like such a psycho, a mean-spirited psycho is what I looked like. A lot of people are trying to give me a lot of people, my wife included, was saying, is this a Tourette's thing? I have Tourette's syndrome. And I don't think it is, right? Like, that feels like a cop-out.
Good for him here, too. He has the potential ability to sneak out of responsibility by blaming it on his Tourette's, and he's choosing not to do that. He's saying, I don't think it's really a part of that. It might be related, kind of. And I would say that it's possible that it's kind of impulsivity can be a part of Tourette's or a tic disorder.
Normal as possible. And for the most part, I do find that strategy worked. But I look up, and one of the top results for symptoms of behavior is compulsive behavior, impulsivity. You know what I mean? Lack of restraint. And these are some of the top things that are...
Okay, so he has been talking for a bit about how, as he was processing what had happened with Cutie Cinderella, with people, including talking with his wife, Ethan was being told by people, it's like, well, isn't this just a symptom of your Tourette's, that you have a hard time controlling your impulses? And at first, Ethan, I think, kudos to him for doing this, he says, it seems kind of like a cop-out. I don't want to just claim that somehow this behavior, this pattern that I've had is somehow a disorder, like I'm not to blame for it. But then he looks up some of the symptoms and he finds that impulsivity is a symptom of Tourette's and a lack of behavioral controls, that kind of thing. And so it's complicated. What I can tell you is that the research does show there could be a fair amount of people with Tourette's with undiagnosed ADHD as well. Because if you had ADHD, it would actually make it difficult to control not only your attention, but also your impulse control. That's much more, if I heard that someone had trouble along the lines of what Ethan is describing, I would first go down a road of ADHD exploration rather than going down a road of Tourette's, because ADHD it's just classic ADHD. You're sitting there in a chair and you're on a podcast and you're trying to host, and there's a lot of different distractions, and you're all paying attention to a woman crying, a victim talking about her victimization. There's a lot of thoughts that enter his brain, and he's like, oh, let's make a joke. And without contemplating the consequences of that, which is just classic result of having ADHD, that is one of the main features of ADHD, is just like impulse comes into their mind, and the executive function doesn't have the time or the ability to, in that moment, run through all the calculations of, okay, if I do this, then this will happen, then that will happen, then that will happen, and then this will be bad. And so I need to suppress that impulse. And so let me utilize my brain to suppress that. One's executive function is involved in all that. And if you have a diminished capacity for your executive function, then you're going to have a hard time resisting that impulse, right? And then you just act, and then you're like, oh my God, what did I just do? Now I'm in trouble. So it's just a classic ADHD thing. And when you understand that as the individual and people understand it around you, you can manage it. It doesn't eliminate the possibility, but it does change the perspective, right? Because when someone does something that's hurtful, you imagine if that they did think about the consequences and did it anyway. But with people with ADHD, they might not have the ability to do that in that moment. It's complicated. But so if I heard someone like Ethan talking about this pattern of impulsivity that harms other people, and he's tried to change it and he hasn't been successful, I would imagine ADHD. But he's going down a Tourette's road. Is it also possible to conceptualize it with underneath the umbrella of Tourette's? That's stretching it a little bit, because usually when we're talking about impulse control, we're talking about the impulse to make a movement or to say a phrase. It's a very brief moment of impulse control. What he did was, and what he's, I think, describing as a pattern is he will think, wouldn't it be funny if we did this, and it'll hurt other people's feelings, And there were several things that he did. You could argue, apart from the very beginning of the impulse control issue, meaning that he somehow communicated with a fella named Zach, his colleague, to play this Christmas song. So you could argue that was impulsive. But then the laughter afterwards, it would seem to go on for a long time. It's not exactly impulse control, right? It's this lack of empathy for the individual, that cutie Cinderella who's talking about being victimized, right? So it's something, I think, different. Now, could his Tourette's Could this behavior be conceptualized within his Tourette's or an undiagnosed ADHD or an undiagnosed impulsivity issue? Yeah, it's possible. But if I were his clinician, which of course I'm not, I would say, okay, well, let's conceptualize it however we want, really. We can go down that road. We could say, well, it could be Tourette's, could be ADHD, could be something else. All right. What do we do about it? How do we change it? How do we account for it? Well, we make sure that we're properly treating whatever the diagnosis is, medication, this kind of thing. But really, it's a lot of impulse control, cognitive skills, the ability to stop and think. There's a lot of different techniques that I will work, and other people like me in my field will work with people with, for example, ADHD and even Tourette's. There's a lot of techniques to manage your impulse, to try to remember the consequences, to think about the consequences a little bit longer. Because for people without this disorder, they will immediately feel the consequences, right? For someone that doesn't have this difference, they have the impulse to play the Christmas song and to make a joke, and they say, oh, that would be bad, not only for this individual, but for me, for all of us. This will be bad for the podcast if I act on this impulse. So let's not do that. Well, if you have a disorder, it might be such that you don't have that ability to check in with the consequences. So what do? Do you just give up? No. What you do is you really try to get into a routine, a habit of forcing yourself to consider consequences, even though it's not naturally occurring to you, right? For me, for example, if I were in his shoes and I didn't impulsively play that Christmas song, I would immediately go, oh, it would feel bad to me to see me. Oh my God, no, that would be horrible, right? So people with ADHD they don't necessarily have, it's not a matter of empathy. It's a matter of the impulse emerges within the consciousness or the brain. With me, there's a stop along the way in my brain where it says, what are the consequences? What will happen if we actually act on this impulse? And then I immediately conclude, ooh, that would be bad. And then I don't have to try to suppress it. There's a whole system that suppresses the behavior on its own. I don't have to really try that hard, right? It's just like immediately like, oh my God, I can feel the future pain of acting out on the impulse. That would be horrible. Ugh. People with ADHD, there is no stop. It just goes straight to motivation. The impulse happens and it immediately just goes, okay, let's do it. Now, with Tourette's, it's similar but different, and it's much more brief. Typically, when we're talking about Tourette's, we're talking about a brief moment, a brief movement, a brief cough, a brief burst of words or something. We're not talking about, let me talk to this other person and tell them to do this. It's not typically what we're talking about, but one could conceptualize it that way. And if that helps him to go down a road, it's all about outcomes. It's about what helps. Does it matter if we accurately identify, which we wouldn't be able to anyway, because we can't open his brain and say, oh, he has this issue. It's a matter of cobbling together symptoms and self-report and different ideas, research, like, well, it kind of looks like this. And so it matters what the outcome is. It doesn't matter what the label is. So if he actually sets out to not harm other people in the future and to reduce his impulsive behavior by engaging with maybe self-help or a clinician who specializes in this that really works on habits of impulse control, then it doesn't really matter what label we put to it, right? Because if it's habits of impulse control that address his supposed ADHD, then great. Or his Tourette's, part of his Tourette's, then fine. Or something else. Maybe he's just generally impulsive. It doesn't necessarily matter what we label it. It matters what the outcome is, and what will determine the outcome is the pathway of treatment and change.
Being listed. So I think it's a bit of a cop-out. I think I have control over these things. I feel I do.
Right. That would be my suspicion. He's a very successful content provider, one of the most successful as far as I can tell. So to have that much success, you have to have an ability to control your behavior in a variety of ways. Now, maybe people that consume his content will point out, no, he's really impulsive and random and spontaneous. Okay. But true inability to manage your impulses and your behaviors would result in and I've treated people like this, a very, very chaotic life that is in shambles. When you truly have difficulty managing your impulses in general, it is very hard to manage anything in life. Now, maybe he does have that issue and other people account for it, and I don't know. But I would suspect that there's another conceptualization out there that will feel more accurate to him. Knowing what I know, I would explore with him his need to make things light, to make things funny, to distract. It's possible that he grew up in a family where that was his role, that parents would be fighting, or someone was depressed, or someone was going through a loss, and he was elected and he volunteered in the family. This is all subconscious, by the way, to make jokes, to distract, to give people something else to pay attention to. And so in the midst of really sitting with cutie Cinderella, because they're all watching this video on the podcast, and she's experiencing a lot of distress, and they're talking about something that's really difficult and painful, that impulse could have kicked in an old tape that he has from his childhood, where it's like, oh, it's my job to make a joke and to distract, and because that's what everyone depends on me for, is to distract us away from this pain. That would be one conceptualization. And there are others. I'm guessing that in all likelihood, there's something along those lines that would be helpful to him. And maybe, a bit of Tourette's and maybe a dash of ADHD is involved in that. But the way he describes his pattern, it sounds more like something that emerged out of family trauma, childhood trauma, relational trauma, than necessarily some difference in his brain.
But I don't know. Maybe it has something to do with it. I don't know, because I'm not really even sure how to describe it. And obviously, that doesn't absolve me of any blame, right? Like, I feel it's a cop-out. But maybe, I don't know how to describe, I don't even know how to explain it. But I am very sorry to Cutie, and I do feel horrible, and I, support her 100% in trying to get that stuff removed, the deepfake stuff. And, you know,
Even the great Ethan Klein has a dog that barks in the middle of his content creation, just like me. Suddenly this dog is barking.
I offered that I obviously been through a lot of legal stuff, and I have great litigators who work on just this type of thing. She mentioned she wanted to sue them in her video, and I told her, and I want her to know that, you know, if she needs resources, I would love to donate. Even if she's open to that, to fund this kind of thing. I strongly believe that this whole deepfake thing is like super insane. It might be legal because there's no laws on the book. I don't know the legality of it. It hasn't really been tested in court that I'm aware.
All right, so let's go over all the first 7 of my 11 components of an apology, which are usually at the core of it. Acknowledge the transgression. I'm not cutie Cinderella, but I think he did that. Acknowledging the harm, I think he did that. He had a good topic sentence. He could have elaborated. Taking responsibility, yes, he's not blaming anyone else. People are even giving him the opportunity to shirk his responsibility by saying, no, it's my disorder, right? And he's like, nope, I'm not going to do that. This is my fault. There's something about me that causes me to do this frequently, and I don't think I can blame it on some disorder. Now, could he legitimately, quote unquote, attribute this to a disorder? Yeah, I'm not saying that that's wrong or deplorable or something, but the issue of him taking responsibility, I think, has been met. Number 4 is sincerely express remorse. I think he's done that. Again, I'm not cutie Cinderella, but I would say that he did that. Number 5, explain the cause without making excuses. Yeah, I would say he did that in a way that I almost never see, if maybe I've never seen before. Now, he's not identifying the cause, as he will probably figure out later down the line, but he is saying, I have an issue. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's something. It's something about me. So that he's pointing at something. He doesn't know what it is yet, but he's like, that's the cause. The cause is me. There's a personality difference or something about me that causes me to do this. And this was an example of that. I'm not making an excuse, but that's what it is. And so that's met in my book. Number 6 is provide a plan to address the cause. He has not done that. You could argue that he's implied it, that he does plan on working on it, but a good plan would be, I'm going to consult with a specialist. Now, maybe he is in therapy and he is doing it, but he could have mentioned that. And then 7 is to offer remedy, which he is doing. He's saying, I want to offer remedy by providing my resources, by providing money to help you. I also want to signal amp your cause by talking more about this. So he is offering remedy. So aside from overtly providing a plan to address the cause, but you could argue that he kind of implied it, he has met, shall we say, 6.5 out of 7, which I don't know if I've ever said in any of these videos. So I gotta give him an A+, right? Now, everything depends on cutie Cinderella's reaction to this, but in terms of a public apology, this is A+.
I think it's a noble and good cause for her to do that. And it could actually make a difference if she were able to get like some kind of law about doing deep fakes of real people like that. So I just want to apologize to everybody, and especially to Cutie, who I respect and actually think very highly of. And I'm very sorry, guys, and will continue to try to do better and be more mindful going forward.
Okay, so that's the end of his apology. I think there's a follow-up, though, so let's go to that.
Like, I didn't instantly forgive him. I literally said, why would you do that to me? It's really fucked up of you. But I do believe he's sorry. I think he shouldn't have done that. I think he knows he shouldn't have done that.
Okay, so Cutie Cinderella is saying that she believes that Ethan is sorry. She didn't say at least the clip that Philip DeFranco played, she didn't say she necessarily accepts his apology or forgives him. All right, well, that was a very interesting rabbit hole I went down. I thought I was just going to make a short little video, but as always, there's a lot of detail and a lot to say. So I hope y'all appreciated that. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.